This segment brought to you by Brown Chevrolet Buick in Wamego, just a short drive down the yellow brick road. Good Wednesday morning to you. I'm Frank.
I'm Deb.
And this is Around Kansas, just a couple of days before Christmas.
Before Santa Claus comes. Yeah. Do you remember watching the TV and, watching the progress of Santa as the radar tracked him in the sky? Wonder when the meteorologist started doing that. Do you know?
Well, it was on radio too.
Did they?
Actually, I was around before television. And so you'd listen to the radio and they'd have a little gong and said, Santa alert, Santa is now such and such and such and such.
Really?
And of course then with the advent of television on a big scale, then they started doing that, yeah.
Do you remember?
I'm that old, yes.
Do you remember the Cold War story about the guy who defected from Russia at Christmas because he knew that the guard would be down because it was Christmas, and he was able to get through and defect? Do you remember that? We're going to have to look that up because that was a really cool story about this guy who he thought, if I just can do it on Christmas night, then, there won't be many people working, and they'll be not so inclined to shoot me down, which was true. And so
there's also the World War I story,
the truce
on Christmas Eve, when in the trenches there was a ceasefire. But the thing is the Germans were singing Christmas carols, the Americans were singing Christmas carols, and
French.
Both sides realized, hey, we're singing the same songs.
Right.
And so they came up out of the trenches, and they all got together and exchanged stories and everything else. And then after Christmas, they didn't want to fight anymore.
Oh, it was wrenching.
And so the generals came in and replaced every one of them so that the war could resume.
Yeah, it's just a wrenching story. And as we're marking the anniversaries, of course, the 100 years since World War I, that Christmas truce, it's a heartbreaking story. During the Civil War, similar things happened. They would be, and of course, they speak the same language, essentially the same, Northern and Southern, it's essentially the same. We have some of the same words, but they would be across the riverbanks and singing, and they could hear each other, and they would call back and forth, and they would trade things and, give each other Christmas gifts. And so, that happened. Of course, then the other Christmas story when you're talking about war is when George Washington burned, was it Trenton? Yeah. Is that where he arrived on Christmas Day, crossed the Delaware, and caught the British asleep and hungover? And that one worked for us, didn't it? Nothing like Christmas and war.
So let's think of things more peaceful here. But anyway, but that's the magic of Christmas.
It is. It is. That's exactly right. And those stories are really special. And of course, we had talked last week about the songs like White Christmas, of course, and I'll Be Home for Christmas, was especially poignant for boys who were away from home, serving in the military Christmas time. And so, so a lot of our traditions come out of those things. I heard the bells on Christmas Day, Civil War. That's one of my favorite carols. It's so beautiful and so meaningful. So there's a lot of connections there. Of course, I can draw military history connection to just anything.
So anyway, did we mess up your Wednesday before Christmas?
Are you in tears yet?
These are things that actually happen, and they're not really sad things, they happen.
And they're meaningful things. Yeah. They're meaningful things. Yeah, it's a difference between sad and meaningful. Yeah, it can be meaningful and not sad, right, Frank?
Right.
Okay, let's go. We'll be back in a minute.
Lecompton. The name was splashed across newspapers throughout America and Europe. It was debated in the halls of Congress. Lecompton interprets its unique territorial history with 2 museums and other sites. Events throughout the year celebrate history and community. Visit the Territorial Capitol Museum, where more than 70 trees are displayed with thousands of antique and vintage ornaments, and be sure to stop in the gift shops in both Lecompton museums. Spend the day in historic Lecompton, shopping, eating, savoring the rich history.